crafty friends, Shana from ShanoukiArt, working in my Shoe Gluebook today. I'm going with a vintage theme. It's all about neutral colors, and I have a few shoes that I could use in this spread. I will see at the end which one is suited best. As usual, I've collected more stuff than I will need. I do like to have variety and choice, but of course you can work with a few simple things too. Keeping to the style of my glue book, I'm going to cut straight edges and I'm going to start with this vintage style receipts. I love the handwriting on this and I use this style quite often in my vintage work. I find this glue book very relaxing. I find I don't have to overthink anything. I really just cut and glue. I do give a little bit of thought of what's going to be the next piece and I try to create balance and variety, but it really is just about letting go and enjoying the process. I've noticed that I always start by gluing my first piece on the top left of the page. It's not something that I plan or do on purpose, it's just where my hands take me. I leave this to be quite intuitive, and for me that means that I start on the top left, I work to the right and down and then into the center, sort of in a clockwise way. Of course, there's no right or wrong way of doing this. You can start in the center, you can start on the edges, you can stick papers all over and then fill the gaps. I like to do mine one next to the other. It's all personal choice. Some of the pieces that I'm using, for example, that one with the numbers down the left is from Taperlogy. I also have some pieces from Your Creative Studio. I'll put the links to the shops in the description box below. And then I've also used a piece of printed kit that I had coffee stained and never used in a journal, so I had it spare. And also some sheet music, anything in a neutral tone. None of this, of course, is planned. Like I said earlier, it's all just quite intuitive. I just go through the pieces that I have around me and just see what piece I want to put next. I do try to create some balance and contrast, and I, for example, wouldn't put two pieces of dark ephemera or papers together. I'd put maybe a lighter one in between just to create that contrast. And as always, I'm using simply a glue stick to glue everything down. And it's also totally okay to reuse a pattern or a paper on the page. Not every piece you stick down has to be unique. That first piece that I stuck down on the top left with the handwriting, I have a smaller piece that I've used on the right, but I have stuck it long ways, just for a point of difference. But I like using the same papers or patterns on a single page. I believe it creates continuity. It would also work if, say, you only had 5 pieces to work with. If you had to cut those up into smaller pieces and make it sort of like a patchwork, alternating those, you'd still have an interesting glue book page. You don't have to have 50 different elements. I just have accumulated quite a bit and I want to start using it. That's why I sort of bring everything out, but it will most certainly work with very few pieces too. I also like sticking smaller elements over sort of the background that I create. I believe this gives my glue book some depth. So you'll notice I normally stick mostly butterflies that I really love working with, or other smaller die cuts or elements over the top, scattered over the page to create interest. But this one I did not like, so I took it off. Let me know in the comments below what color you'd like to see next in my Shoe Glue book. This is a page from an old encyclopedia. I love the aged color of the paper. I use this quite often in a lot of my projects. But we just need a really small piece to fill that gap on this one. I also find for me that I like working in a square shape for my glue book. It's the first time I'm doing a glue book, so I haven't really tried any other shape, but I'm really enjoying doing it in a square. The book that I'm using is actually just labeled a scrapbook that I found at Kmart here in Australia. It's spiral bound and it's got really nice thick paper, probably about 300 GSM, so it's nice and sturdy. They're only $5 each, and I think I might get a couple more before they sell out. I'm not putting a lot of dark on this page. I'm keeping it more of the lighter vintage color. There are a few darker elements. For example, this dark brown, which is like a coffee cup stain on the piece I've just put down, which balances out with a darker piece on the top. My thinking was that the shoes that I found are all like a dark brown, except the one that's gold. And if I had to use that, it might not stand out if there's a lot of dark brown pieces in the background. So I've kept it lighter so that the shoe can stand out. But I have added a few darker pieces for contrast. This is a stamp in the form of a sticker. I'm just going to trim off the excess all the way around. I love using actually stamps in the glue book as it's a great little gap filler. If you've got a small little area that you want to fill, a little colored stamp goes great. You'll see the stamp that I've just stuck down is also a darker brown, which then balances out the other two darker pieces that I have. This is a little die cut from a die cut sheet that comes in one of the Craft small scrapbook pads. I love using circles, and usually I like to cut them in half and use them along the edge. I have this ruler sticker, which is also from a Craft pad. The theme was like a go back to school type of theme, and there was all rulers. I love that it's got that vintage color, so I'm going to stick that down. You'll notice when I have an element, I tend to move it around the page just to see where it'll look best. Sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't. I've noticed that my page sort of works in threes, or in sort of a triangle. What I mean is, if you look at the darker brown that I've used, we've got the coffee cup stand at the bottom, and then the darker one at the top, and then one in the middle. So that creates a three in a sort of longish triangle. Then the little light ruler that I've just stuck down earlier matches then the bottom little strip that I've put next to the coffee stain, and then the one I've put at the top that creates another triangle in that lighter wood color. And I think that's how my mind creates balance. That area next to the numbers is quite stark and bare, so I'm going to stick down that tag die cut with the butterflies. It fits perfectly. I'm going to bring my shoes into the picture and see which one looks best. This one was my favorite, and I'm going to go with this one. There was also a second shoe on this page, and I thought about using it too, but in the end I decided to go with just one. I'll save the gold shoe for another day. A quick fussy cut, and then I'll see where the shoe goes best on the page. A lot of moving around again. As you can see, because the shoe is darker and the background is quite light, it does stand out really well, which is what I wanted. filling in that last little gap with some vintage paper in printed text. My daughter Tia was chatting to me while I was doing this, and then I asked her to pick her favorite out of these photos, and she picked the weirdest looking kid, which I didn't think suited my theme, so I went with this pretty vintage lady. I can almost picture her actually wearing a pair of these shoes. The photo page that you've just saw me cut this out from is actually a Tim Holtz page from one of his paper pads. The butterfly sticker I'm going to fussy cut too, just to get off that little edge. I love using numbers in my work, especially if I'm working on something vintage style. These little numbers from one of the pages, I'm going to just stick that down, adds a little bit more interest. And another butterfly. Not surprising. Notice when I add the small piece of lighter ephemera, the contrast on that side of the page changes. Adding some more interest with some semi-transparent stickers. And then my favorite for any vintage project is vintage style tape. This is homemade, it's very easy to make, and I will link the tutorial in the description box below. I'm going to add a few pieces here and there, and I think it just lifts the entire page to a different level. Amongst my things, I found this piece of dress pattern tissue paper. I'm going to add a small piece on the bottom left. And it's totally okay to stick things over other things. Don't be afraid to cover things up. I'm going to now write something on the left. I'm going to use a goldy brown Sharpie marker. I always write it out first in pencil in rough, just so I can get an idea of the spacing, and also to double check I don't make any spelling mistakes in the final one. This doesn't have to be perfect. I sort of just use a ruler just to keep my lines a little straight, but I think going forward I want to try and just do it totally freehand. If you have a beautiful quote or some words of wisdom, please do add them in the comments below. I'd love to use them in my glue book going forward. And I strongly believe you should do what makes your soul happy. I really hope you enjoyed this video and were inspired to create your own glue book. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the little bell so you're notified every time I upload new content. Thanks again for watching, happy creating, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.